All right, ladies and gentlemen. So, if I remember correctly, last class we worked through all the things that policymaking institutions do. Then, I believe that we worked all the way through taxes, right? Like we talked about progressive, regressive, proportional. So, did we start talking about how the government actually spends this money? Like what they spend their money on? Okay, so that's probably where we want to start then. I think it's right here. Oh, nope, that's taxes. We'll just keep going. Make you a little dizzy. Okay, so this is a picture then of our most recent budget. So when you look through it, it kind of shows you. So these are those appropriations bills. We have a bill on education, we have a bill on transportation, we have a bill on international affairs, energy and the environment, etc. What is our largest portion of the budget made up of? Good. That's a huge chunk. We put all that together. So Social Security, remember, is going to be money for old people, kind of like our pension system, but it's also going to be to pay for people who are maybe on some kind of disability. Also, unemployment and labor. So if we have a situation where the economy's gone into recession and we're having to spend money on like people's unemployment compensation, that number is going to end up being bigger. So when the economy is in worse shape, we spend more here. Okay. Or if you have more old people. Okay, then we have Medicare and Health. So that's going to be Medicare and Medicaid. So the expenditures that the government has, money that goes to support older people, and then also for people that are in poverty. And we're going to talk a little bit more about those in the beginning. That comprises 60% of our budget, right there. We refer to those things as entitlements. And we'll get to entitlements in just a bit. Okay. Military is number 3, about 16%. It hasn't always looked like that. It used to be that military was the top, but we spend a lot more in here now than we used to, and so that's gone down. Interest on the debt. That says 6% if you can't see it. That means 6 out of every $100 that we pay is interest on that massive amount of money that we owe. Okay? Who can explain interest to me? Is it Joseph? What's interest on debt? What does that mean to you? Go ahead, Rachel.
When you owe money, like if you owe money to the bank, then they're gonna add a percentage to it, and then so the longer it's in there, it gets kind of like compounded, and the percentage goes up, so you have to owe more.
Perfect. That makes sense. So not only has our debt risen, but as your debt gets larger and larger, that interest payment gets larger as well. The rest of these are all the categories of spending. So you've got food, education, transportation, etc. So there are 2 broad ways that we organize spending. We have mandatory spending and we have discretionary spending. And it's not tricky, it's what it sounds like. If you have discretion, that means you get to make a choice. So which of these does Congress get to decide how much money they're going to spend on? Which of these is Congress obligated to pay? They have to do it. What do you think? Stephen? Say it again. Entitlements is what? They can choose or they have to? They have to, okay? So if you have, like if my grandma turned, well, not my grandma because she is already, so let's say if your grandma turned 65 this year and she's eligible for Social Security and she fills out her paperwork, the government can't say, oh wow, we had a really bad year, we don't have a lot of money, so we're not going to be able to pay you anymore for Social Security. Like that would be frightening to people because we just kind of accept it. So mandatory spending is government has created a program, you become eligible for whatever reason. So you've reached the right age, you've worked enough years, your income is low enough, whatever the program is, it doesn't matter how much money we have, you have to do it. So the only way that you can change Social Security payments or change Medicare or Medicaid is if you change the program. So you say, all right, I'm going to change the law. Now you have to do this to be eligible. You have to make some kind of shift. Okay? So if you look at do we have to spend 16% of our budget on the military? Or do we have choice, do you think?
A little bit of both.
It is actually a little bit of both. Some military spending is mandatory. I can't, I don't know enough to go into, you have to do this, you don't have to do this, but it's a combination, okay? Interest on the debt. Do we get to decide whether or not we're going to pay interest on our debt, or are we obligated to that?
Obligated.
Right. I mean, I guess technically you couldn't. If you don't pay your interest on your debt, basically what that means is you've reneged on your debt. You promised somebody you're going to pay it, and then you're not. So if Rachel does that to the bank, they're going to come take her car away. So if the United States government does that, if we didn't pay our debt, what do you think would happen? Like come take our cars away? Like what would they do? Okay. All right. Well, keep that in the back of your head then, and we'll talk about it in a minute. Okay. So the rest of these, they get to decide. So I want you to pay attention over the next couple of days when you hear politicians, if they talk at all, which this isn't really what they're seeming to talk about, but if they talked about, I want to do this, I want to create this program, I want to spend this, I want to develop roads, I want to make schools better. This is what they're talking about. That is actually an incredibly small portion of our budget. We spend very little time talking about this, and that's actually where we spend most of our money. So it's an interesting kind of dichotomy. Okay, so let's look a little bit at that debt, because I think we need to understand debt a little bit better. Here, I made it really big. Let me kind of shrink it down a little bit. Okay, so I like this clock. It's got a lot of numbers on there. Here, we'll go back and make it bigger, because I just want to focus. Oh, wrong way. Okay, so let's just focus on this part right here. So this shows you the United States debt. Mhm. I'm gonna show you in a minute who we owe to who. Okay. Let's differentiate debt and deficit. Deficit means in 1 year I spend more than I bring in. So it's for a 1-year budget. If you had a surplus, you bring in more than you spend. Okay? Debt means that you have accumulated deficit spending over time. So now there's this massive money that you owe. I am going to way oversimplify how we go into debt, okay? It's more complicated than this, but it's this basic premise. Do any of you in this room have a savings bond, United States government savings bond? Really? I bet you do. You do? Okay. Like it's something that people get, like it's like things great aunts give you when you're young. So my oldest daughter, when my husband, the company my husband worked for when she was born, they had a policy where when you have a baby, they give you a $500 savings bond. So what that is, and we have it, it's like in our safe. So it's a certificate, and it says this entitles the bearer to $500 from the United States government, and let's just pretend it matures when she turns 18. So she will take that bond when she's 18, and she will go to the bank, and she will be able to redeem that for $500. And when the company purchased it, let's say just pretend, they paid $400. So back in 2005 when she was born, Computer Associates gave $400 to the United States government as a loan. In return for, in 18 years, we would redeem that, and they would have to pay out $500. Okay? Do you guys, Rachel and girl, what was your name? I'm sorry, sweetie. Hannah. Do you guys think about your bonds as like a positive thing? I mean, do you know about them, or you're gonna get to return them? Like, do you know any of that?
I just hear my parents talk about it because they got one like their company.
Yeah, so it might be more to the same place. If you had that $500 savings bond sitting in your parents' safe, and you're going to be able to go get $500 when you turn 18, would you view that as positive or negative? You're right, like that's a good thing, right? And technically, like it was really a good thing all around because 18 years ago, the government got $400. Now they're going to pay back $500, but that's fine. Here's the question though: how are they going to have $500 to give to my daughter? Where are they going to get it? Taxes. So they're going to have to tax somebody in order to get the $500. What else could they do? Oh, they could sell another bond because there's going to be more generations of people. So they'll sell another bond and they'll perpetuate that cycle. That's how we go into that kind of debt because it's equivalent of you using a credit card to pay off a credit card. Like it's just kind of going into that same cycle. Okay. Now that being said, we would never not have debt. Like that wouldn't be it wouldn't make sense for us to have no debt. And that $19 trillion, like I can't even really. Like if you look at the growth of our government, if you look at the productivity and all that kind of stuff, it's scary to look at that. But I mean, can you think in 19 trillions? Like, does that mean anything to you? Like it's just a number, right? Like you can't really worry about it in that sense. The one thing for you to think about though is let's go back to our little pie chart. Oh, darn it. Sorry. Okay, so if you think about that growing debt in terms of this pie chart as a percentage of the budget, what is a consequence of our growing debt in relationship to this? This number is going to keep getting bigger. So, if I remember correctly, when I first started teaching 15 years ago, I'm pretty sure the interest on the debt would hover about 3% of the budget. So in a 15-year period, it's gone from 3% of our budget to 6% of our budget. Doesn't really sound like a lot, but if you think about it in terms of billions of dollars, that's 3% that was taken from somewhere else. So in terms of that, that is something to consider. That's not something to like go, oh my gosh, like the country's going to fall apart, okay? So long as people continue buying savings bonds, so long as people continue paying their taxes, this can continue, right? We can continue buying bonds. Hannah, do you worry, like if you were to take your bond to the bank, do you worry that they might not give you back the money? Is that in a consideration, like, oh, they might not give it to me? Not at the moment, right? So what if you lived in, say, Greece, and you were to take the bond to the bank in Greece? Would you trust that you would get that money? Okay, so maybe y'all don't know. So Greece had like a huge financial disaster in recent history, and so their bonds would be relatively like worth nothing. Okay, Mexico had that a couple of years, like back in the 90s, where people stopped paying taxes, they weren't collecting enough money, and their bonds were worth basically nothing. So it's people's belief that that will continue. They trust that the government's going to pay that money. If that ever were to change, then it might become something to be really concerned about. Okay, so we looked at the debt. I heard somebody in the back of the room say, to whom do we owe this money? So I really like this graphic because I thought it was pretty helpful. Do you ever hear people say that China owns all of our debt? Yeah, I hear people say that a lot. It's kind of like popular rhetoric. So this takes that $19 trillion and it breaks it up in terms of where that money is held. So all the brown is held within the United States. So those are, and when I use my daughter's $500 savings bond, you guys, that's like minimal. You can buy like some that are worth like $10,000, and they're T-bills and treasury notes. Like it's the same concept. It's just different lengths of maturity, different interest rates, etc. So on the brown, those are held by state and local governments. Any of your parents that have a 401k or a mutual fund, an IRA, they invest portions of those in U.S. savings bonds because it's good, like it's a safe investment. So it's held within there. The blue is debt the federal government holds to itself. When you take economics next semester, you're going to learn about the Federal Reserve and about how they use these bonds, they like buy and sell them to try to help the economy grow or help the economy contract. So if you look at that, there's a massive portion of it that they actually hold themselves and they use it positively. They use it to help Social Security grow. They use it to help with military retirement grow. The red is what is held by other governments or by institutions in other governments. So it's not necessarily just the Chinese government, it could be Chinese banks, it could be Chinese investors. So it's really not a huge percentage, but there are certain countries where there's certain people that have like a ton of money. Like remember in geography you learned about those like newly emerging countries where there's like lots of wealth. Well, so many of those investors, that was a really great place to put their money. You know, they had a ton and they're like, okay, I'm going to put that there. It's not as though they're like going to just show up and like demand all this money. You know what I mean? But does it affect their impact on us? A little bit. I mean, it definitely is there. But it's not as scary as some people try to make it out to be. Okay, anything else about debt that I was going to cover? I don't remember. Oh, yeah. Okay, hold on. Okay, so the last thing about the debt, and then we can finally move on. You may have heard in the last year there was a little bit of rhetoric about something called the debt limit. And we were about to come to our place